Here's how not to deal with anxiety. Try to get rid of it. I strongly recommend that you think again about all the advice you've probably gotten in your life about the idea that something's wrong with you if you're feeling anxious. I say to my students, they're getting their master's degrees at Harvard University. I say, look, if you're not feeling some sadness and anxiety studying at Harvard, then you need therapy. It's normal. That's a normal part of life. Remember, all of your emotions exist for a reason. They can be dysregulated. They can be exaggerated. Don't get me wrong. They can become a medical problem. They can obstruct your quality of life. Absolutely. But the presence of aversive emotions, it's literally the most common thing in life. It's the most normal part of life. People who don't feel negative emotions are in terrific danger, as a matter of fact. But we have a problem philosophically in modern life. It's kind of the opposite of the hippie culture. Back in the 60s, they used to say, if it feels good, do it. Kind of the Berkeley Summer of Love. A lot of people got really screwed up with that. A lot of people kind of messed up their lives, taking a lot of drugs and a lot of problems, quite frankly. Because the truth is, you need to be self-governing. If it feels good, sometimes you shouldn't do it. But the opposite of that is equally bad. We have kind of the opposite of the Summer of Love. We have the Summer of Fear. I don't know if you're watching this during the summertime, but you get my point. And that motto is, if it feels bad, make it stop, right? If something's making me feel crummy, sad, and anxious, it's evidence that I'm messed up, I'm broken, I've got a pathology. Well, no, that's not right, as a matter of fact. And the fruit of that kind of thinking is kind of an eliminationist strategy for any kind of pain. Let me talk to you about what happens when you simply try to eliminate your anxiety or your sadness or any other aversive emotions or even physical sensations that you have. And that actually gets into an area of biology that's been explored under a model called the fear avoidance model of pain. Most people aren't afraid of pain. They're afraid of how they'll feel. They're afraid of their feelings more than they're afraid of pain itself. It's kind of a funny distinction, but I find this in my work all the time, that people aren't really worried about a bad thing happening. They're worried about how they'll feel if a bad thing happens. I'll talk to my students. They'll say, "Man, I'm really worried about getting a job." I'm saying, "Really? I mean, you don't think that? Do you think you're going to be on the street and starve?" Like, no, of course not. So what are you really afraid of? And when they drill down, it's like, I'm afraid of how I'm going to feel about myself if I don't get a job. I'm going to feel like a, kind of a loser. And they're afraid of their emotions. Weird to be afraid of your emotions, right? But we are all the time. And that's what pain is. They're not afraid of the physical sensation. They're afraid of their emotions if they have a physical sensation. And they try to avoid the fear of pain. They're trying to get rid of that particular fear. What the research clearly finds is that when people fear physical pain, they tend to become hypervigilant, and they make efforts to elude it. And a lot of this literature comes from the medical world. There's a journal literally called Pain. The great thing about academia is that there's a journal on literally everything, and it's a good journal to boot. And this is a journal that talks about how people deal with pain. And there's a very interesting article, I'll leave it in the show notes, from 2015, titled "Pain Avoidance versus Reward Seeking: An Experimental Investigation into Chronic Pain." And what it finds is it's looking at back pain. This is the case study they're looking at is back pain. And they find when people try to eliminate their back pain because they're afraid of feeling this back pain, what they tend to do is they get into a pattern of disuse, and that worsens the discomfort, because the worst thing you can do when your back hurts is not move around. It gets stiff and back pain actually gets worse. And if you do that for a long period of time, it can become quite catastrophic for you. The bottom line is, when it comes to physical pain, when you try to eliminate it or avoid it completely, it's going to get worse. It's not just a hypothesis. It's a well understood fact. As a matter of fact, it's this idea of pain elimination, of physical pain elimination, has been completely catastrophic in many parts of American society. This arguably is one of the biggest reasons for the opiate crisis that we've had in the United States and many countries around the world. There was an explosion of pain elimination using opioid drugs, which led to overprescription, abuse, an epidemic of addiction, as a matter of fact. The rise of opioid prescriptions and subsequent addiction might be thought of as the worst thing about pain elimination that's ever happened in American society, because science found a way to eliminate pain, which created a whole lot more pain. Nothing weird about that, by the way. We do this all the time when we try to eliminate something and make it much, much worse. One of the things that people hate the most is boredom, for example. So we created anti-boredom devices. What are they? That's that thing in your pocket that you look at while you're waiting for a light to change, because you're so worried about becoming bored that you'll look at that thing and it winds up creating all sorts of other problems that we're even talking about here, such as anxiety. So when we try to eliminate something we don't like, we often make it worse. We very often make it worse, and that's certainly the case when it comes to physical pain. Back to mental pain, and especially in the case of anxiety. Mental suffering has an avoidance cycle, just like physical pain. We fear mental pain. We're afraid of being anxious. We're afraid of being sad. And we're afraid of being broken, having something wrong with us, as a matter of fact. And so the result of it is that we try to eliminate our anxiety, and that means pushing away the discomfort that we have, the mental discomfort that we have. And guess what that means? That means that making it chronic. That means a chronic, unfocused fear, which is the opposite of the advice I just gave you for the anxiety journal, of leaning into it, of facing it with courage, and saying, yeah, I can deal with this, bring it on, which is what that first exercise was really all about. There's a pretty interesting 2009 study that shows that when people are instructed to suppress anxious behaviors, they felt their anxiety increased. So once again, you will rebel when you try to. The anxiety that people feel is, in a sense, an early warning system. Why would evolution allow this to persist? And the answer is because when you feel that creeping sensation of fear in an unfocused way, it means there might be a threat below your level of perception. So it's actually worth feeling. When you try to suppress it, your body and your brain are instinctively going to say, if you're trying to suppress this thing, I'm really suspicious now, and it's going to come on much, much stronger. There's a 2024 study in the Journal of Happiness Studies, which is really the best journal in my field, that talks about when people believe that the absence of mental pain is equivalent to happiness, they get much unhappier. Okay, so this is a side note, but it's related to what we're talking about here. If you believe that you need to get rid of your anxiety, get rid of your sadness, get rid of your negative emotions to become happier, you will become unhappier. That's the bottom line. It's the same idea of pain elimination, the same idea. So stop doing that. Any attempt to avoid negative experiences is going to lead to more unhappiness as well. Here's a case in point. I see this all the time. People are really afraid and they're really anxious about their romantic lives. What are they afraid of? They're afraid of rejection. And if you've never dated, then rejection might seem really, really scary to you. And it's especially the case when, in the modern environment where, there's weirdly, it's like, for some people, it's harder to date. Some people find the apps just not accommodating to meeting people, as a matter of fact. Dating has gotten really, really wonky in the technological age. And so I meet a lot of people, a lot of students have come to me, and they're 27, 28 years old. They never date. Some of them have never dated. And the reason is because they're afraid of rejection, is how that works. The whole point of this is that in fear of unhappiness that would come from the feeling of rejection, they increase their anxiety about the phenomenon. They don't do it, and they become unhappier with their lives as a result, because they feel isolated, because they feel lonely, as a matter of fact. So you see what I'm saying here. The eliminationist philosophy is not the way to deal with this. It's leaning in, which was my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice is don't lean out. One more piece of advice. What should you do instead of leaning out? And the answer is, of course, acceptance. There's a bunch of different psychological techniques for doing so. One is called Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy, MBCT. I'll put something in the references to this, where you accept your distress as painful, but not catastrophic and not impossible to lessen. Huh? If you're anxious about something and say, I've got fear about something like this, and I don't like it, but it's probably not catastrophic. And even if it is pretty catastrophic, there's something I can do about this. This is related to the Buddhist concept of suffering being resistance multiplied by pain. Resistance times pain. Now think about that a little bit. Suffering will go up with pain, of course, but even more it'll go up with resistance. The more you resist the suffering, the higher the suffering is actually going to become. That's the idea behind mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. Acceptance. But don't accept the idea there's nothing you can do about it. I'm giving you ideas on what you can do about it right here. I gave you one before, the anxiety journal. I'm going to give you another one here in a second. The second that's related to this is called acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, not the test to get into college. Acceptance and commitment therapy is a focus on living a valued life despite pain. In other words, accepting I've got a lot of pain, but I'm going to also focus on the parts of my life that are not pain. That's hard to do sometimes, but you can get better at it. Again, look at the show notes to figure out how you can fight your negativity bias. You absolutely can do that. That's been an extremely effective technique. So those are two mindfulness-based kind of techniques that can help you along the way.